Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with an obituary with the emphasis on the bitch. Actually, this one is going to be pretty mild because I don't have a lot to bitch about. The person in question, the deceased, is the conductor, Christoph von Dohnányi, a wonderful conductor, a stupendous musician, and a real force in 20th century music and kind of an icon in terms of, European musical culture in the 20th century because of his family. He was the grandson of the composer Ernst von Dohnányi, or Erno Dohnányi, the Hungarian composer, who actually wound up teaching at the University of Florida for a long time. And his father and uncle, I believe also, and maybe other members of his family, were executed by the Nazis because they were staunch anti-fascists, and they supposedly were participating in a plot to assassinate Hitler. Good plot. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. When he was only 15, he lost his father. He studied with his grandfather in Florida and also at other places in Europe. But he was... I don't know. I can't think of another conductor who more exemplified sort of the 20th century aesthetic. His specialty was music of the first Viennese school. Well, not even Haydn so much, but Mozart for sure. Beethoven to an extent. And then, Brahms and, all the German standards and the Viennese folk. And then contemporary music. Bartók, Stravinsky, modern music. He really made his reputation as an opera conductor, at least in his youth at Frankfurt, I believe he was, where he was a great proponent of Regietheater, that sort of crazy directorial thing, up to a point. I mean, he was a very, very smart guy. He was married 3 times. He had 5 kids, but most notably to the singer Anya Cilia, who was herself quite the icon. I mean, she was a Bayreuth stalwart and then also a great proponent of music of the Second Viennese School. And she did a great court viol, 7 Deadly Sins. And I met her back up in Finland for a while, and we hung out for a while, and she was a panic. She really was quite the thing. But he was, as a conductor, well, what can I say? He said it best, in a way, when he was complaining about his tenure in Cleveland, which was wonderful, by the way. I mean, it was very successful, but he used to say, we give a great concert and George Sell gets a great review. He was not a conductor who had an immediately identifiable personal stamp of authority on his performances. He was a musician's musician in that respect, but like so many musicians, and George Sell actually was one of them, he was so rich in musical facts most of the time that his performances have worn extremely well. He didn't impose bizarre personal things on his music making. He vanished into the music itself. But boy, his recordings have held up well. The Decca box, the big box of all of his Cleveland recordings, is pretty spectacular. He did this amazing, I have it sitting right here. I keep it handy at all times. This amazing Brahms cycle on Teldec. He did some wonderful recordings for Teldec. It's better than Sell. His Mozart was at least as good as Sell. I mean, it really was. He was no slouch. And he didn't have to fear competition from anybody. I do think, he made a bunch of recordings for Telarc, which really helped put that label on the map at the time. His Beethoven cycle is on Telarc. It was not greeted with a heck of a lot of enthusiasm when it first came out, because, again, he's a very self-effacing artist. And so the performances struck most listeners, I think, as a little bit on the dull side, a little, uninteresting. But rehearing them today, particularly when we hear dull period instrument performances by the boatload, we can appreciate just how fine, just how consistent he was. They were all superbly well played, beautifully recorded, well judged, traditional in their way performances, which is interesting because as an opera director in Frankfurt and in his other posts, he was known for his Regie Theater productions, but he wasn't that kind of conductor. Not at all. He didn't do weird things. He was a huge proponent of opera in concert. At the Blossom Festival, they did operas, and he did operas in Cleveland. He was supposed to record a Ring for Decca. It didn't happen. He only got through Rheingold and Valkyrie before it was canceled for financial reasons. The end of his tenure in Cleveland corresponded to the end of the major labels as serious classical music record producers. And Cleveland suffered most of all. Some of his best recordings, because Cleveland was always getting second shrift from Decca. He was on Decca. He was a Decca artist. He had the Vienna Philharmonic when he did stuff with that. Well, that got maybe a little bit more push. But his Cleveland recordings were always sidelined. And some of his best ones were his late ones. He had that fabulous disc of, sort of concerti grossi sort of pieces by Martinu with the Bartók music for strings, percussion, and celesta. His Ives and Viennese recordings, his Mozart with Webern. He had those predilections, very European predilections, to mix and match things that didn't make for the most audience-friendly programming. Let's put it that way. I saw him conduct many, many times. It was always very satisfying. Two of the most outstanding performances of anything I ever saw in my life were Dohnányi performances. One was the music for strings, percussion, and celesta, which was at the closing of Carnegie Hall before the renovation concert. He was on the first half. Isaac Stern played the Beethoven violin concerto about a quarter tone sharp for the second half of the concert. That was not pleasant, but the Bartók was amazing. And he recorded it, so yay. The other was, and I've talked about this before, was his Viennese Amérique, which is stunning. Fortunately, was recorded along with the Ives Fourth or some other Ives stuff. And that concert was one of the most shocking and stunning things I ever saw. Even he was surprised when it was over. I remember he turned around to the audience and went like, "Whoa, that was really something, wasn't it?" It was dazzling, and so's his recording of it. So he was really he should have been promoted more than he was. I really believe both his Viennese and his American recordings, because he did repertoire that a lot of other people did. With Vienna, that fabulous coupling of Stravinsky ballets, the Firebird and Petrushka with the Bartók Miraculous Mandarin and stuff like that, and two portraits, or two pictures, whatever they were. They're phenomenal recordings. I also keep those handy. Multiple versions of them. They're they're in the overflow room. They're just stunning. They were re-released on Eloquence, Australian Eloquence. He never got the attention that he deserved, I don't think. His Bruckner was very good. His Mahler was horrible. That was his Achilles heel. Was his Mahler. I don't think he really liked Mahler. He was famous for criticizing Bernstein's Mahler for saying, well, it was too emotional and it was tasteless, was his view. Well, Mahler is not tasteful. He was not a tasteful composer. Here's a news flash. And playing him in this spiffy, cleaned up, undercharacterized, undramatic way was not a good idea. The worst recording he ever released was the Mahler Fourth with Cleveland, which has mistakes. In the first movement, the cymbal player gets lost, and it's embarrassing. And how that got released without being fixed and without him stopping to say, wait, no, there's something wrong here. I just don't understand. And it's sort of, everybody has their pluses and minuses. Everybody has their advantages and disadvantages. And, his weak spot was those Mahler recordings. He did the first, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and the ninth, I believe. And they all suck. I mean, basically, they're just not charismatic. And he wasn't that kind of conductor. So I don't know why he did that music. Maybe he felt he had to. Mahler often operates that way for people who believe that they are specialists in the Viennese schools, the various Viennese schools. There's Mahler in the middle, who is both of that school, but also who transcends it in so many ways and does not work if you're merely going to try and limit him to the traditional Viennese way of doing things. Anyway, that was his my one bitch of this obituary, in what was otherwise really a tremendous career and a tremendously satisfying body of work on disc. So, and he retired at the appropriate time. I mean, there's no evidence of him slowing down or falling apart or getting slovenly or any of the things that happen to a lot of the older conductors, the elder statesmen. He just seemed to know what he was doing, and he knew how to do it, and we were the beneficiaries of that. So I absolutely have no problem paying him tribute for the superb musician and artist that he was. He will be sorely missed at the end, I guess, of a dynasty in a way. And, well, rest in peace, Maestro Dohnányi. Keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.